Hello, my dear ones. Thank you for coming to sit with me for a little while. You know, life has a way of teaching us lessons we never signed up for. Some of those lessons come wrapped in gentle whispers, and well, others arrive like a storm that threatens to tear down your whole house. My story is about one of those storms. It's a story I held inside for a long, long time, locked away in a secret room in my heart. But I've learned that a story locked away has power over you. When you bring it out into the light, you take that power back. So today, I'm taking my power back. This is the story of my husband, the man who beat me for years, and the day I passed out and he took me to the hospital and pretended to be a hero. If you're ready to hear a story about finding a light in the darkest of places, then make yourself comfortable. And if you find a piece of your own heart in my story, maybe consider joining our little family here. Subscribe and we can walk through these hard truths together. My name is Lena. For most of my life, I was a seamstress. There's a magic in taking a piece of fabric, something flat and formless, and with a thread and a needle, turning it into something with purpose. A dress that could make a young girl feel like a princess on her first day of school. A suit for a man heading to a job interview, his shoulders a little straighter because of the fit. I had a little shop, Lena's Fine Stitches. It was tiny, but it was mine. The air smelled of fresh cotton and possibility. I remember the bell on the door would jingle and I'd look up from my machine and there would be a person with a dream in their eyes and a bundle of fabric in their arms. We would create something together. It was a quiet, happy life. Then I met Mark. He was a salesman, full of big dreams and even bigger promises. He came into my shop one day to have a suit altered. He charmed me. He said my little shop was charming, but he had visions of a bigger life for us. A real house, 2 cars, respect. He was like a strong wind, and I guess I was a leaf, ready to be swept up. I was lonely. The shop was my life, but it wasn't a companion to warm my bed at night. He filled a space I didn't even know was empty. I loved him. So I did what I thought a good wife should do. I closed my shop. I remember the day I turned the sign on the door to closed for the last time. I packed up my sewing machines, my bolts of fabric, my spools of thread in every color you could imagine, crimson, sapphire, emerald, gold. I put my dreams in cardboard boxes and stored them in the basement of the house we bought together. His house. It was always his house. I became the manager of our home, of his life. I made sure his suits were pressed, his dinners were hot, and his home was a showpiece for the friends he'd bring over from church or work. Our life became a beautiful, fragile vase I was constantly polishing, terrified that one wrong move would send it shattering to the floor. The first time he hit me, it was over a burnt dinner. I'd been trying a new recipe, a pot roast, and I'd gotten distracted on a phone call with my sister, Sarah. The bottom was black. When he saw it, his face changed. It wasn't just disappointment. It was a storm cloud descending. "Is this what I work all day for?" he'd said, his voice low and dangerous. "To come home to this garbage?" I started to apologize, to say I'd make him a sandwich, but he swept the plate off the table. It shattered against the wall. Then he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in like claws, and he backhanded me across the face. A shock, a sting on my cheek, and then a flood of apologies, of tears, of promises that it would never, ever happen again. He cried. He said he was so stressed from work, that he loved me so much, that he was a monster. I believed him. I mended that tear in our marriage just like I'd mend a torn seam, thinking my patience, my love, my silence was the thread that could hold it all together. But the seams kept splitting. A bad day at work for him meant a shove into the kitchen counter for me. A comment he didn't like would end with his hand gripping my arm so tight the bruises would bloom later, like ugly purple flowers under my skin. I became expert in excuses. "Oh, this?" I'd laugh, pointing to my wrist wrapped in a bandage. "Clumsy me, I took a tumble down the basement steps." "This bruise on my ribs? You wouldn't believe it. I walked right into the open dishwasher door." I wore long sleeves in the summer. I became a master of makeup, covering the faint yellow and green remnants of his anger. I painted a picture of a perfect, slightly accident-prone wife, and Mark was the doting, concerned husband. In public, he'd hold my hand. He'd pull out my chair. He'd call me his better half. And people believed it. They'd tell me how lucky I was. And in the quiet, hidden parts of my heart, I'd scream, "Can't you see? Can't any of you see?" But the truth was, I was the one who'd become blind to my own worth. I'd sacrificed my voice, my talent, my very self on the altar of keeping the peace. My world shrank to the size of our house. My only job was to manage his moods, to anticipate his anger, to be quiet, to be small, to be invisible. I was a ghost in my own life, just drifting through the rooms, polishing the vase. The isolation was the worst of it. He would subtly criticize my friends until I stopped calling them. "Martha is so gossipy, Lena. Do you really want to be like that?" He'd get angry when I talked to my sister Sarah on the phone, saying she was a bad influence, that she put ideas in my head. "Your sister has never liked me. She's trying to break us up." Slowly, steadily, like a gardener pulling weeds, he cut me off from every single lifeline until he was the only island I had left in a vast, terrifying ocean. And I stayed. Why? It's the question everyone asks. I stayed because I was afraid. Afraid of him, yes. But more than that, I was afraid of the shame. I was afraid that if people found out, they would see me as a failure. The woman who couldn't keep her husband happy. The woman who let this happen. I was so busy preserving the image of my marriage that I was letting the real me, the Lena who could create beautiful things with her hands, wither away to nothing. The storm that finally broke me started, like so many others, with money. Mark had made a bad investment. Lost a significant amount. He came home that night with a thundercloud hanging over him. I knew the signs. The clenched jaw. The way he slammed the car door. The silence as he walked into the house. I'd made his favorite meal, pot roast, hoping to soften the edge. But there was no softening it that night. He started yelling before he even reached the kitchen. It was my fault. If I'd been smarter with the grocery budget, if I hadn't needed new glasses last year, if I was still running that ridiculous little sewing hobby, maybe I could have contributed. I made a mistake then. A fatal one. I spoke back. In a small, trembling voice, I said, "Mark, that's not fair. You know I manage the budget carefully. There's no extra money for investments." The words hung in the air for a single, silent second. The air grew thick and heavy. And then the storm hit. He lunged across the table. Plates rattled. He didn't hit me with his fist, not this time. He grabbed the front of my dress and shoved me hard. I lost my balance, my feet tangling in the leg of the chair. I fell backwards and the side of my head connected with the sharp, solid corner of the oak coffee table. There was a crack. A sickening, internal sound. A blinding, white-hot pain that exploded behind my eyes. Then nothing but a ringing silence and a dizzying, nauseating swirl of the room. I saw stars, little pinpricks of light dancing in my vision. He stood over me, his chest heaving. I saw the anger in his eyes flicker, just for a second, and be replaced by something else. Fear. Not for me, for himself. For what he had done. "Get up," he snarled. "Get up, Lena. You're fine. You're always so clumsy." I wasn't fine. The room was tilting. I managed to get to my knees, my hand going to the side of my head. It came away wet. When I looked at my fingers, they were smeared with red. He saw the blood. His face went pale. "Stupid woman," he muttered, but his voice had lost its force. He helped me to the bathroom, his grip on my arm now more supportive than violent. He cleaned the cut. It wasn't deep, but it was bleeding a lot, and put a bandage on it. He didn't say another word. He just put me to bed, turned off the light, and left me in the dark. That was the worst part, I think, the silence afterward. Lying in the dark, my head throbbing with a rhythm that felt wrong, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. The vase had finally shattered, and I was lying there, cut by the pieces. I touched the bandage on my head, and I knew, deep in my soul, that something had broken that could not be mended. Not this time. The next day, the headache was still there, a deep, persistent throb that the aspirin couldn't touch. It was a different kind of pain, a pressure building behind my eyes. I went through the motions. I made breakfast. I cleaned up. The world felt muffled, like I was hearing everything from underwater. Around lunchtime, I went out to the backyard to hang the laundry. The sun was too bright. It hurt my eyes. I remember pinning one of Mark's white shirts to the line. The clothespin felt heavy in my hand. I looked at that shirt, blowing gently in the breeze, so clean and pure and white, and I thought about the man who wore it, the man who shared my bed, the man who had turned my life into this silent, fearful prison. The pressure in my head intensified, a drumbeat of pain. A wave of dizziness hit me so hard I had to grab onto the clothesline for support. The world tilted on its axis. The green of the grass, the blue of the sky, the white of the shirts, they all swirled together into a nauseating kaleidoscope. The last thing I heard was the sound of the birds chirping, as if it were just any other day. Then, everything went black. Waking up was a slow, confusing process. The first thing I was aware of was a smell. Antiseptic, clean but sterile, unfriendly. Then a beeping sound, steady, rhythmic. I forced my eyes open. The light was harsh, fluorescent. I was in a hospital bed. And there he was, Mark, sitting in a chair beside my bed, holding my hand. His eyes were red-rimmed as if he'd been crying. He saw my eyes flutter open, and he leaned forward, a look of such profound, tender relief that for a dizzying second, I thought I must have dreamed it all. The shove, the fall, the years of fear. Maybe it was all a nightmare. "Lena," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Oh, thank God, you're awake." He squeezed my hand. It felt like a trap. A nurse came in, a young woman with a bright smile. "Well, hello there, sleepyhead. You gave your husband quite a scare." Mark looked up at her, his face the very picture of devoted exhaustion. "She just collapsed," he told the nurse, his voice trembling with a convincing mix of fear and love. "I was in my office and I heard a thud from the backyard. I ran out and found her just lying there. I didn't know what to do. I just scooped her up and raced here as fast as I could." He was painting his masterpiece, the hero husband, the man who rushed to save his wife. He was even embellishing, adding details. She's been working so hard lately, not taking care of herself. I've been so worried. The nurse smiled at him, a look of pure sympathy. You did the right thing. It's always scary. The doctor will be in shortly. She's a lucky woman to have you. And I lay there, my head still pounding, my body weak, listening to him weave his lie with such skill, such conviction. He was building my prison walls even higher, right there in that hospital room, and he was using the sympathy of strangers as his bricks and mortar. I felt the last flicker of hope inside me sputter and die. If they believed him, if everyone always believed him, then I was truly, utterly lost. There was no escape. This was my life. This would always be my life. The doctor came. He was a brisk, efficient man. He said I had a minor concussion and had fainted due to dehydration and stress. They wanted to keep me for observation for a few hours, run an MRI just to be thorough. Mark never left my side. He fluffed my pillows. He held a cup of water to my lips with a trembling hand. He was performing, and he was giving the performance of his lifetime. And I was his prop, the silent, sick wife. I felt like I was suffocating. The beeping of the heart monitor felt like it was counting down the seconds until I had to go back home with him, back to the hell he had created. It was during one of these performances that an older nurse came in to check my vitals. She had kind eyes, the color of a gray sky, and a quiet, no-nonsense manner. She didn't gush over Mark. She just gave him a brief professional nod as she checked the monitors and wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm. Mark was in the middle of telling her, yet again, the story of how he'd saved me. I just knew I had to get her here, he was saying, his voice thick with fake emotion. I've never been so scared in my life. The nurse, her back to him as she noted my blood pressure, didn't respond. Her eyes met mine. They weren't just kind. They were sharp, intelligent. They seemed to look right through me, through the bandage on my head, through the hospital gown, right into the secret, bruised heart of me. They lingered for a moment on the faint, yellowing bruise on my forearm, the one peeking out from under the sleeve of the gown, a souvenir from a week ago. As she removed the blood pressure cuff, her hands were gentle. Her fingers brushed against my palm. And then, with a movement so smooth and deliberate it was almost imperceptible, she pressed something into my hand, a small, folded piece of paper. My heart stopped. She gave my arm a final, soft pat, her eyes holding mine for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, a look that said, I see you. Then, she turned and left the room without a backward glance. My hand, hidden under the thin hospital blanket, closed around the paper. It felt like it was burning my skin. My mind was racing. What was it? A bill? A note from the doctor? Mark was droning on. I think she just works too hard, always worrying about the house, about me. She never thinks of herself. His words were like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. She never thinks of herself. It was true. I didn't. I hadn't for years. My whole existence was about anticipating his needs, managing his emotions, surviving his rage. With my heart hammering against my ribs so loud I was sure he could hear it, I slowly, carefully moved my hand. I unfolded the paper under the blanket, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely manage it. I angled it so I could see the words, scrawled in neat, clear handwriting. It read, "Blink twice if you are not safe at home." The world stopped. Those 7 words, they were a lifeline thrown into the ocean I was drowning in. They were a key. They were a voice in the silence. A stranger. A stranger had seen through his performance. She had seen me. She had seen the story he wasn't telling. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and sudden. I tried to blink them back. Mark saw them. "What's wrong, honey?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "Are you in pain? Should I call the nurse?" I looked at him, at the man who had shoved me, hurt me, silenced me for years, and I looked towards the door where that angel of a nurse had just disappeared. And I made a choice. I looked directly at Mark, letting the tears fall, and I blinked. Once, twice. His face softened. "It's okay, baby. It's okay. I'm right here. You're safe now." He had no idea. No idea that my 2 blinks were not a response to his question. They were my first act of rebellion in a decade. They were my no. They were my help me. They were the most courageous thing I had ever done. He thought they were for him, but they were my message to the world. A world that, for the first time in a very long time, had finally sent someone back to find me. That single moment, that tiny note pressed into my sweaty palm, was the thread I would use to start mending my own life. The pattern was about to change completely. When I blinked those 2 blinks, it felt like I had set off a bomb inside my own life. But on the outside, nothing happened. Not at first. Mark kept talking. I stopped listening. My whole world had narrowed to that piece of paper in my hand and the thundering of my own heart. I felt like a spy in my own hospital room. Every second felt like an hour. What if she didn't understand? What if she thought I had something in my eye? What if she came back and said something in front of Mark? The fear was a cold snake coiling in my stomach. But underneath it, for the first time, there was something else. A tiny, flickering flame of hope. It was so fragile, I was afraid to even breathe on it. About 20 minutes later, the same nurse came back. Her name tag said Brenda. She was carrying a fresh pitcher of water. "Time for your MRI, Lena," she said, her voice calm and professional. She looked at Mark. "Sir, you'll need to wait here. It'll be about 45 minutes. A flicker of irritation crossed Mark's face. He didn't like being told what to do, but he forced a smile. "Of course, whatever she needs." He leaned over and kissed my forehead. A possessive, performative kiss. "I'll be right here when you get back, sweetheart." Brenda helped me into a wheelchair. My legs felt like jelly. She wheeled me out of the room and down the hall. We didn't go towards the MRI wing. Instead, she turned a corner, then another, into a quieter part of the hospital. She stopped in front of an unmarked door and opened it. It wasn't a scanning room. It was a small, quiet office with a desk, a couch, and 2 comfortable chairs. A woman was sitting there. She was maybe in her 40s, dressed not in scrubs, but in soft civilian clothes, a sweater and slacks. She had a kind, calm face, but her eyes were sharp and assessing. "Lena," Brenda said, her voice dropping to a gentle, reassuring tone. "This is Susan. She's a domestic violence advocate with the hospital." My breath caught in my throat. It was real. This was happening. Susan stood up and smiled. "Hello, Lena. It's good to meet you. You're safe here. Would you like some water?" Those simple words, "you're safe here," unlocked something inside me. A dam broke. I started to cry. Not quiet, pretty tears, but great, heaving sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for all the burnt dinners, for all the bruised ribs, for all the lonely nights, for all the lies I'd told to protect the man who was hurting me. I cried for the woman I used to be, the one with the sewing shop and the spools of colorful thread. Brenda and Susan just let me cry. Brenda put a box of tissues in my lap, and Susan poured a glass of water, setting it on the table beside me. They didn't rush me. They didn't tell me to calm down. They just waited. a fortress of quiet strength around my crumbling world. When the sobs finally subsided into shaky hiccups, Susan spoke again. "Lena, you are in control here. This is your story. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. But we're here to help if you'll let us." I looked at her, my vision blurry with tears. He told everyone he saved me," I whispered, my voice raspy. "He pushed me. I hit my head." And once I started, I couldn't stop. The words tumbled out. I told them about the shove, the coffee table, the years of walking on eggshells, the isolation, the fear. I showed them the faint yellowing bruise on my upper arm, the one I'd gotten a week before. I told them about my sister, Sarah, who I hadn't spoken to in over a year because Mark said she was dramatic. Susan listened, taking a few notes, but mostly just listening with her whole being. When I was finished, she nodded slowly. "What you've described is a pattern of abuse, Lena. Emotional, physical, and financial. You have options. We can involve the police. We can get you to a safe place, a shelter where he cannot find you. We can help you start the process of getting a restraining order, but only if you want to." The police? The word sent a fresh jolt of terror through me. "He'll be so angry," I whispered. "His anger is not your responsibility," Susan said, her voice firm but gentle. "Your safety is." Brenda, who had been standing quietly by the door, spoke up. "Lena, we see this more often than you think. The hero act is a common one. We have protocols for this. You are not alone. You are not alone." I looked from Brenda's steady, knowing gaze to Susan's calm, determined face. These two strangers in this quiet, unmarked room were offering me a way out. A terrifying, uncertain way out, but a way out nonetheless. I thought of Mark, sitting in my hospital room, basking in the glow of his own lie. I thought of going back to that house, to that life, to the constant, grinding fear. I thought of the note, "Blink twice." I had blinked, and they had come. I took a deep, shuddering breath. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years. "What do I need to do?" I asked. What followed was a whirlwind of quiet, efficient action. Susan made a phone call. A short while later, a police officer arrived, a woman named Officer Miller. She was tall and had a no-nonsense demeanor, but her handshake was firm and her eyes were kind. She didn't treat me like I was stupid or weak. She treated me like a victim of a crime, which is exactly what I was. I had to tell my story again. It was hard, reliving it all, saying the words out loud to a police officer. But with Susan sitting beside me, her silent presence a pillar of support, I did it. I gave a formal statement. Officer Miller took pictures of my old bruises. She documented everything. "Based on your statement and the evidence of past injuries, we have probable cause to arrest him for aggravated assault for the incident that brought you here today. He's still in your hospital room?" I nodded, my heart in my throat. "Okay," she said. "This is what's going to happen. We will go to the room and place him under arrest. He will be taken to the station. You will not be going home with him. Susan has arranged for you to be discharged directly into a temporary safe house, a shelter for women in your situation. You will be safe there." They were going to arrest him. Right here. Right now. The reality of it was terrifying. My hands started to shake. What will he do?" "He will be in police custody," Officer Miller said firmly. He cannot hurt you. We will make sure you are far away from here before he has a chance to make bail." Susan placed a hand on my arm. "This is the bravest thing you will ever do, Lena. You are not just saving yourself tonight. You are saving the woman you are meant to become." That did it. The woman you are meant to become. I wasn't just Lena, the victim. I was Lena, the survivor. Lena, the seamstress. I had a future. It was a scary blank canvas, but it was mine to paint. I looked at Officer Miller and nodded. "Okay," I whispered. "I'm ready." I didn't have to be in the room for the arrest. I waited in Susan's office while Officer Miller and another officer went to my hospital room. Brenda stayed with me. We heard nothing. The hospital walls were thick. But in my mind, I could picture it. The shock on Mark's face, the mask of the hero crumbling away to reveal the angry, cornered man beneath, the confusion of the other nurses, the end of his performance. About 15 minutes later, Officer Miller returned. "It's done," she said. "He's been taken into custody." He was vocal, but it's over. It wasn't over. I knew that. This was just the beginning of a long legal battle, but it was the end of the life I had known. A few hours later, after the doctors officially discharged me, I left the hospital. But I didn't walk out the front door. I was taken out through a service elevator and into a waiting car. A simple, unremarkable sedan driven by another volunteer from the shelter. I had nothing with me but the clothes on my back and the hospital band on my wrist. I was leaving everything behind. But as the car pulled away from the hospital, driving away from that life, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. I felt free. The shelter was called Haven. It was an unassuming building in a part of town I didn't know. Inside, it was clean, simple, and safe. There were locks on the doors. There were other women there, of all ages and backgrounds. We didn't talk much at first. There was a shared understanding in our eyes, a knowing. We were all birds with broken wings, learning how to fly again. The first few days were a blur of fear and disorientation. I jumped at every sound. I had nightmares where I was back in the house and Mark was coming up the stairs, his footsteps heavy on the wood. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, forgetting for a moment where I was. But the women at Haven, the staff, they understood. They gave me a small room of my own. They gave me clothes, toiletries, food. They gave me space to just be. They didn't ask for my story until I was ready to give it. I started attending the group therapy sessions. It was there, listening to other women, a young mother who had been controlled by her partner, an older woman who had been financially abused by her son, that I realized my story wasn't unique. The details were different, but the pattern was the same. Control, isolation, fear. Hearing their strength gave me strength. We were a garden of battered flowers, and we were starting to turn our faces towards the sun together. A week after I arrived, with Susan's help, I made a phone call. The hardest phone call of my life. I called my sister, Sarah. The phone rang twice. "Hello?" Her voice. It was the same. A little older, but the same. It sounded like home. Tears instantly filled my eyes. "Sarah?" My voice was a croak. There was a long silence. "Lena? Is that you? My God, are you okay? I haven't heard from you in over a year. I've been so worried. I called and called. Mark always said you were busy or resting." And I told her. I told her everything. About the abuse, the hospital, the note, the arrest, the shelter. She listened, and then she started to cry. "Oh, Lena, Why didn't you tell me? I knew it. I knew something was wrong. That man, I never trusted him from the beginning. The way he looked at you, it was like he owned you. I'm getting in the car. I'm coming to get you. You're coming to stay with me. My big sister. After all the silence, after all the distance Mark had created, she was still my big sister. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask questions that made me feel blamed. She just said, I'm coming. And she did. She drove 3 hours that very day. When I saw her, we held each other and cried for what felt like an hour. It was the first time I had felt the arms of someone who truly, unconditionally loved me in a decade. She smelled of lavender and home. I didn't go to live with her right away. I needed to stand on my own 2 feet first. I needed to prove to myself that I could. But her support was my anchor. She visited every weekend, bringing home-cooked meals and gossip and love. With her help and with the legal aid provided by the shelter, I navigated the terrifying process of getting a permanent restraining order against Mark. The court hearing was another ordeal. I had to see him again. He looked thinner, older. He glared at me with such pure hatred from across the courtroom, but I didn't look away. I held his gaze. I was no longer the woman he could push around. I had an army now. Susan was there, my court advocate was there, and Sarah was right beside me, her hand on my back, a steady, warm pressure. The judge, a stern-faced woman, listened to the evidence. She saw the photos. She read my statement. She granted the restraining order for the maximum length of time. I had won my first battle. A month after I arrived at Haven, I felt strong enough to leave. I moved in with Sarah temporarily. Her home was a small, cozy cottage filled with light and plants. The first thing I did, with a small bit of savings she lent me, was buy a used sewing machine. It wasn't fancy. It was a simple, reliable model. I set it up in her spare room. I threaded the needle. I took a plain piece of muslin and I guided it under the presser foot. I pushed the pedal. The sound, the vibration, the feel of the fabric moving under my hands, it was like coming home. The muscle memory was all there. My hands remembered. They remembered how to create, not just to clean and to mend broken things for someone else. They remembered how to make something beautiful for me. I started small. I hemmed her curtains. I made pillowcases for her couch. Then I started making simple, elegant wrap dresses and selling them online. I called my little business Second Stitches. It felt right. It was my second chance, and I was stitching my life back together one seam at a time. The legal case against Mark dragged on. He eventually took a plea deal for the assault charge. He got probation and was ordered to attend anger management. It wasn't the dramatic jail sentence you see in movies, but it was a consequence. It was a mark on his record. It was the truth, officially acknowledged. I had held him accountable, and that was a victory in itself. One afternoon, about a year after I left the hospital, I was working on a dress in Sarah's spare room, my studio. The sun was streaming in the window. I was humming. I was happy. I was designing a dress with pockets because every woman deserves pockets. I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since I closed the door to my old shop. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. It was my daughter. My breath caught. In all this time, I hadn't spoken to her. Emily was Mark's daughter from his first marriage, and she had always been a daddy's girl. She was in her late 20s now. She looked tired, worn down. Her eyes were red. I opened the door, my heart pounding a different kind of fear. "Lena," she said, her voice small. "Emily," I said. I didn't invite her in. I was protecting my sanctuary. She started to cry. "Dad told me, he said you had a breakdown, that you made up these awful lies and ruined his life. He lost his job because of the arrest. The house is being foreclosed on because he couldn't keep up with the payments. He left. He moved to another state with some woman he met online. I just listened. I felt a pang of sadness for her, for the pain she was in. The world she knew had collapsed. But I felt nothing for Mark. His choices had led him here. "I'm struggling," she sobbed. "I can't do it on my own. I have nowhere to go. I'm sorry for whatever happened. Can I come stay with you for a while?" There it was. The request I had been waiting for my whole life, in a way. The plea to be taken care of, to be the matriarch, the safe harbor. The old Lena would have said yes immediately, would have shoved her own needs aside to fix someone else's problem. I looked at her. This young woman who had chosen to believe her father's lies even when the truth was right in front of her, and I felt calm. I had spent a year rebuilding myself. I was not going to tear down my own walls to provide shelter for someone who had helped hold the torch to my old life. "Emily," I said, my voice soft but clear, "I am so sorry you're hurting. I forgive you for not believing me. I forgive you for your part in all of this. I hold no anger towards you in my heart. But I cannot let you move in." She looked stunned, as if I had slapped her. "But where will I go? I'm your daughter." "You are my stepdaughter," I corrected her gently, "and I love you. But my home is my sanctuary now. It is my haven, and I need to protect the peace I've built here. Your father's consequences are not my emergency. Your struggle is real, and I am sorry for it, but it is not a ticket into my safe space." It was the hardest and most powerful thing I have ever said. She was angry at first. She cried. She called me selfish, but I held my ground. I had learned that my peace was not selfish. It was sacred. It was the reward for my bravery. She left that day. It was painful. It hurt my heart. But a few weeks later, she called. She asked if we could have that coffee. We did. It was awkward and stilted, but it was a start. A new, honest start, built on the truth, not on the lies I used to tell to keep the peace. We are slowly, carefully building a new relationship. A relationship with boundaries. A relationship where I am a person, not just a resource. That was my true revenge. Not his arrest, not his failed life. My revenge was my peace. My revenge was this sewing machine. My revenge was saying no to protect my yes. My revenge is this life I have built, stitch by careful stitch, into something strong and beautiful and wholly my own. So, my dear ones, that is my story. It's not a story about a villain and a victim. It's a story about a woman who got lost and a woman who found her way home. To herself. If you are in a dark place, if you are feeling small and afraid and alone, I want you to hear me. I see you. Your story is not over. There is a thread of strength inside you, even if you can't feel it right now. Look for your Brenda. Look for your note. It might be a kind word from a stranger, a pamphlet left in a waiting room, a phone number for a helpline. Your blink is your choice to reach for it. You are not alone. And you, my dear, are worth saving. If my story has touched you, if it has made you feel seen or given you a little bit of hope, then do me a kindness. Share this light. Like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Your share might be the note someone else needs to find. And subscribe to this channel. Let's build a haven right here, a place where we can share our stories, find our strength, and remind each other that no matter how broken we feel, we can always pick up the pieces and create something new, something beautiful, something that is truly ours. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sitting with me. Remember to be kind to yourselves and to always honor the strong, beautiful person you are deep down inside. Goodbye for now.